Hi there, this is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. And today's random review is for Night Moves by Arthur Penn from 1975. This is a Region B Premium Collection Blu-ray, and it's spine number 95 for those counting at home. And this is another quintessential 70s film. You know me, I like a good 70s film. For me, the last golden era of Hollywood filmmaking. The films were intelligent and forced the audience to actually pay attention and kind of follow which character's which, and actually have an attention span. The 70s filmmaking generally was fairly downbeat, fairly bleak. The cinematography was more kind of functional rather than grandiose. Stuff shot in the sunlight. This film takes place in Hollywood, it takes place in the Florida Keys, it takes place in New Mexico. So, for example, in 60s and 50s filmmaking, that sun-drenched look might be of giving warmth and heat, but in the 70s, sun-drenched scenes, it's the sun that gives you cancer. It's, the 70s was that kind of decade. The summer of love and the power of love had been defeated by multiple assassinations and pointless wars. And the filmmaking reflected that. Arthur Penn isn't a filmmaker that I'm that high on. He's more workmanlike for me. Obviously famous for Bonnie and Clyde, which I don't actually have a copy of, bizarrely. So his compositions, his framing, it's more about the characters and the story. Again, it's that 70s look where, with few exceptions, kind of amazing framing and shot composition wasn't really part of the deal. It's more about the characters and the plot. But very much like a lot of 70s films, the plot doesn't necessarily matter particularly. It's not as clear-cut and clinical as perhaps kind of better eras of storytelling. But I just love the 70s pessimism and kind of fatalism. It's almost, these films are almost a throwback to the noirs, like Build My Gallows High or Out of the Past, Robert Mitchum, that kind of streak of fatalism. So I should probably actually talk about Night Moves rather than just the 70s. It stars Gene Hackman, who again is not really my favourite actor in the world, but he's always extremely watchable, if that makes any sense. And he stars as another Harry. He was Harry Cole in Coppola's The Conversation, of course. And he plays an ex-football player who's now a private investigator, whose wife is always kind of asking him to join a kind of bigger company and agency, but he kind of prefers to be independent, which is fair enough. There's a whole subplot about his marriage. the relationship with his father, all that kind of 70s stuff. But he's hired by this older, well, not older lady, she's probably her 50s or 60s, who's still thinking she's a Hollywood actress because she had like bit parts. And her 16-year-old daughter has gone missing, and he's hired to find her. I mean, this film beautifully kind of talks about the kind of underbelly of Hollywood, the kind of less glamorous side of Hollywood. It goes into, the story takes them to leads and stuntmen and people who work on films, but again on a smaller scale than the shiny, glamorous side of Hollywood. So this woman who hires him, you can tell she's pretty much been chewed up by the Hollywood system and spat out, and she's living off the money from her second divorce. So he gets a couple of leads. One is a mechanic played by a very young James Woods, but he still has that James Woods vibrancy and kind of ferocity about him. And then that leads him to a stunt man who specialises in flying planes, and a director who Gene Hackman's character used to know, played by Edward Binns, or the plumber from 12 Angry Men. And those leads in New Mexico give him a lead in the Florida Keys. He goes down to the Florida Keys and finds the girl there, and she's in a strange kind of setup with two older people. The young girl is played by a very young Melanie Griffith. So he then spends a few days with them, and again, because it's the 70s, you could argue, this section could be a little bit tighter, but the relationship between Gene Hackman and the woman who's there, who's herding dolphins because people like dolphins as a pet in their swimming pool. So the dialogue between Gene Hackman and this other character is really quite interesting. It's a little bit off the wall, but strangely fascinating. So eventually he manages to persuade Melanie Griffith to come home to LA, but as he's leaving the family home, now that he's got his cheque and deposited Melanie Griffith with her mother, you can see in the background there's something not quite right. I was going to mention, I don't know whether I should actually mention spoilers. I mean, it's from 1975. I might mention, I'll briefly just say that something happens to Melanie Griffith, and that kind of reignites Gene Hackman's interest in the case, and he goes back to the Florida Keys, and he finds out more stuff. Bodies turn up. As it's a quintessential 70s film, you kind of know bad things are going to happen, and they do. And again, I won't mention the ending because it's maybe not a widely seen film, but it's well worth checking out for that 70s parallax view kind of vibe. Again, Gene Hackman, he's a little bit more reined in than he sometimes can be Again, it's funny, it reminds me a bit about Performance, even though it's completely different to Performance. But they're both films that the stuff that could be tidied up, the stuff that, irritates me slightly, but there's just something about it that I really like. It just has a wonderful vibe to it, because you almost get the feeling that Gene Hackman's character knows that it's not going to end well. This is the 70s, so there's no Hays Code, there's no happy endings. Everybody in the film is kind of burnt out. Everybody's desperate for the big kind of score that will help them escape their lives, but that's they're never actually going to attain that, because it's the 70s and it's a kind of neo-noir, so what's going to happen pretty much. But in its own little convoluted way, again, it's a 70s film, so you have to be patient. You have to be patient to figure out and find out what the story actually is. It's not going to tell you after an hour. So again, for modern audiences, these films might be frustrating because you could deem them as being slow, but I really kind of enjoyed Gene Hackman's character's journey and how he finds out about things. We find out things at the same time that Gene Hackman's character does, and there's some very nice kind of set pieces at the end of the film. It's just really well made. Again, if you're looking for amazing cinematography, this isn't the film. It's a very workmanlike shot, but it's intelligent. It expects you to pay attention. It has a lot to say about Hollywood and that whole subculture of the people that are in Hollywood but haven't actually really made it. So they're part of the system, but they're not really. They're just small cogs in the system, and how they are trapped in that but still can't escape it because they still like the allure of that, because they always think they're going to become something better, even though they're not, because it's the 70s. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below if you have seen Night Moves by Arthur Penn, starring Gene Hackman and very young James Woods and Melanie Griffith. And hopefully we'll see you again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying thanks very much for watching and farewell.